Well, good evening. Welcome to the first installment of Oregon Humanities 2017-2018 Portland Think and Drink series. Thanks. Thanks for being here. My name's Adam Davis. I'm with Oregon Humanities, and before we do anything else, I hope you will all join me in saying a big welcome to Rukaiyah Adams and Eric Ward. Thank you for being here. I think we're really excited about the conversation we're going to have really around themes like race, power, and justice. And we're going to get in there in just a few minutes, but I want to do a couple things before we get there, including sort of lay out the shape of the evening a bit so that you all know at least a little bit about what's ahead of you. Before doing that, just a question that I'd ask for you to respond to with applause. If it's your first Oregon Humanities Think and Drink, could you make a little bit of noise? And if you've been to one before, could you make a little bit of noise? All right. Thanks. So the shape of tonight will be that we'll talk for about an hour, and then we'll invite questions from a microphone that is currently in darkness but will later be illuminated over there. And then towards the end of the question time, we're going to show a trailer for a film that Ifeanyi Bell is working on called Future Portland 3. And Oregon Humanities has been really lucky to be working with Ifeanyi on Future Portland 1 and Future Portland 2. And this third one is going to go even deeper into some of the themes that we'll be talking about tonight. And once you see it, we hope it will whet your appetite for the film to come. And then when that trailer is over, we're going to invite you to stay, eat some small food, and talk to each other, especially to people you don't know, about a couple questions we hope come out of the conversation tonight. So that's the basic shape of the evening. I hope it sounds sort of like what you were imagining. I want to thank just a couple organizations and then jump in. So first I want to thank Willamette Week for helping get the word out about this. I want to thank Tonkin Torp and especially Jeff Cron for sponsoring the series. The Oregon Cultural Trust for putting a lot into making this event possible and many others around the state. It's a good time to have the Oregon Cultural Trust in mind because it's the end of the year, and any gift you make to a cultural organization and then make to the Cultural Trust will come back to you around tax time. And then I want to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is, you may hear in the news sometimes, but they are still functioning strongly and doing a lot of good stuff around the country, and may that be the case for a long time. You've also seen a slide about an advisory group, a group of people doing really incredible work around Portland that has been helping us think about this series in particular. And I'm not going to name people now because you've seen the list, but I want to just say a big thanks to everyone that's been helping so much, even if they're sitting in the middle of the front row. For example, Mary, I see you there, so thank you, and everybody else on there. It's meant a lot to us, and will help shape the year. Last thing I want to say before we jump in is to thank you again for coming out tonight. I know it's raining, but that's not really what I'm talking about. It's that there are a lot of things happening around Portland right now, including with the NAACP Portland, and there are 3 other Oregon Humanities Conversation projects happening right now, and there are many things people could be doing, and I just want to thank you for coming out on a mid-November rainy evening to engage in what should be a good discussion. And you have some biographical information about Eric and Rukaiyah on the flyer. You had it up on slides in front of you. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that except to say that Eric is recently back as now directing the Western States Center after having done some work with the Ford Foundation and Southern Poverty Law Center and many other things, including being in a band that became Sublime.
That's right.
What? You didn't tell me that.
True.
And Rukaiyah is the Chief Investment Officer at Meyer Memorial Trust, the Chair of the Oregon Investment Council, and associated strongly with the Albina Vision, which has been in the news a lot lately. And I think maybe we can start thinking about race, power, and justice there. And I specifically want to begin by asking Rukaiyah, I read recently that you said in one of the pieces about the Albina vision, I'm an investor, not an activist. And so for starters, I just wanted to ask what you meant by that and what that distinction signifies for you.
My job at Meyer is to make the money that we give away. And so that's a technical job. It's a quantitative job. I consider myself a math nerd. I do have a point of view on the world that's quantitatively based. I have the eyes of an investor when I look at communities going through transition and gentrification, but I've been surprised that so few people ask me about my investment chops. They talk to me more about race, power, and other issues. So it's just been fascinating. I thought that I was working so hard in my life to talk about things other than race and gender, and I keep circling back to that conversation. So I've been wrestling with finding my voice as both a technical investor and as a Black woman standing comfortably in her skin and power. It's something I wrestle with. If any of you want to talk about investing, I'm happy to talk to you about my portfolio and how well we've done.
I want to talk.
All right, let's talk about that. But what it has helped me realize is that being the steward of Meyer's portfolio, I'm a proxy for a kind of wealth and power that has historically not been resident in a person like me. And so I have a platform for talking both about the technical side, but also about what it's like to be a woman in the seat and what it's like to be an African American looking out into a world that exploits my people. So it's been something I wrestle with. Yeah.
And maybe we can...
And maybe I can be an activist investor eventually. I just haven't quite integrated those two identities yet.
Okay. Thank you. How does the distinction between activist and investor strike you?
So it's when we talk about like who we are, right? We carry so many multiple identities, and much so when you are a woman or a person of color, right? We have to move through many different environments, and so I label myself very differently. I love it. My most radical friends think I'm very conservative, and my most conservative friends think I'm a Marxist, right? And I can live with both. But one of the things that happens with race is that so much gets projected onto us that we never get to actualize who we are. And I'm not just talking folks of color, but I'm actually talking white folks too, right? One of the things that racism prevents us from doing is being fully human, right? And fully like creating our identities. There should be nothing wrong with being an investor. I don't know if there's a contradiction between being an investor and an activist. Not for me. I'm with you.
Yeah, that was a little loaded there.
Yeah, I know.
All right, I see the elbows are out now.
But I think it's hard to hold both, right? And how we label ourselves in society carries real consequences.
Right.
And in Oregon, labeling oneself as an activist and a person of color carries significant risk, right? And not just from organized hate groups, but from the systems that are in place. And at the end of the day, I'm just gonna shut up, and then I'm gonna preach. When you see this wine hit the bottom, and those great bartenders get up here and refill, I love you all back there. I'm gonna start to preach. But at the end of the day, Rukaiyah can label herself and should be able to claim who she is, right? And it should have no reflection on what she has accomplished and what change has happened in the society.
So if you could just come with me every day of my life and repeat that.
I'm there.
I very much appreciate it, because I do feel like in talking about race and power, I'm vulnerable. That I have lately felt like I'm in trouble. Like saying with words the thoughts that are in my people's heads kind of changes the tone and texture of a lot of my relationships, particularly with white progressives in town, who sometimes I have to be like, yo, cut that shit out, right? Cut it out. So you're right in that I have felt my heart rate, my health has been affected lately as I've started to speak up a little bit more with my own ideas, not just talking about history, but having the nerve to say the way forward is this, and I think I understand it, and get information. That has made me feel like I'm about to get got. I feel that.
That's right. That's right.
Am I?
Look, I mean, yes, in many ways, right? Because there's no safety, right? There's no safety in blackness. There's no safety in being Native American. There's no safety in being Asian. And there is no safety in being Latino. And quite frankly, there is no safety in, there's very little safety in being a white who is rebellious to the concept of whiteness.
Yeah, and I think the safety always was all fake anyway.
That's right.
Because when I walk into a room, even if there isn't a verbal conversation about race and gender, it's nonverbal. And I can feel it around me.
That's
and
right.
I guess lately I've been trying to take the power back and just say it with words rather than just have other people thinking it.
You have the right to define yourself, and no one has the right to take that away from you. It is ultimate power.
So can I do this? I want to go back to the identity as investor, that strange identity, which in a way both of you have inhabited in some ways, certainly working with money and deciding where to put it. And I guess I want to ask about justice and money. And sort of the starkest way I want to put the question is sort of, where is the money for justice?
I picked the wrong week to stop drinking scotch. So, here's what I will say. There is the wealth inequality, right, globally, and in this country is at such a scale that it is not even fathomable anymore to any of us, right? We have such a misconception of where wealth lies in this country that even radicals, progressives, and liberals spend the majority of their days, right, within the nonprofit field, fighting over less than 3% of foundation wealth in this country, right? Less than 3%. And people make each other walk the planks. I've seen sit-ins and you know, what I call the 11 sisters, right? The 11 progressive foundations in the country. And they possess very little of the power, right? What I would say is this, that there's a difference in this country between privilege and power, right? And one of the things we have done within the civil rights and the anti-racist movement is we have focused so much on privilege, right, that we have forgotten that power resides in the hands of a very few set of individuals in this country and a government policy and systems that protect them. So we can't talk about wealth inequality in this country without talking about power. And at the end of the day, as a program officer at the Ford Foundation, right, which was a large foundation, right? Its wealth is substantial, but let's keep it in perspective. that we made the best decisions that we could to fuel movements, but to also change the rules, right? The rules are set in this society about how we are supposed to act, how we are supposed to organize, how we are supposed to identify, right? It's a theater. And unless we break the play, we are never going to move forward to a society where we can live, love, and work free from fear and bigotry. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the strange experience of being in my seat and seeing billions of dollars move, right? Not hundreds or millions, but billions of dollars. At that level, the money is not cash, it's not currency, it's energy and it's power, right? That investing $100 million isn't about the number of dollars, it's signaling to the world what matters. And extracting wealth from people and systems through things like student debt and exploitative lending, we're also signaling what doesn't matter, right? Who doesn't matter. And so it's been a complicated journey to have been homegirl from around the way with one wonderful mother and a family that supports me, but not a lot of wealth, for me to see how the system exploits people and how we extract wealth, even for the benefit of foundations in order to later grant it out. So it's been a real contradiction for me, but where I'm able to sleep at night in this role is that I am changing how we invest. I am changing in whom we invest. I am changing the conversation about what it means to be a wealthy foundation, right? In essence, I am a proxy for the 1%, so to speak, because I control that pool of capital. And if I can begin to pave a way forward with values-based investing and transparency and accountability, then other people will follow. But it is really, 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 really hard to do. I mean, wealth is just a measurement of accumulated privilege and power. That's what it is in this country. Maybe in other places that's different, but when you see those giant pools of capital, it ain't come for free, homies, right? It didn't come for free, and so it's just been an interesting role. Now, I was a lawyer for a long time, and one of the reasons why I left the practice in order to go into investing is I felt like in the advisory role, I wasn't able to control and direct energy and power. So I intended to be in this seat, and I can say that now that I'm in it, it's really freaking hard.
It's really hard.
It's hard because I'm accountable to people, right? I'm accountable to my neighbors and my mother. I don't look her in the eye. I don't want to be a total douchebag. I mean, if I did that, she would still swipe my butt if I wasn't real about it, right? Not real about it.
So is it possible to change the terms from within as a proxy, as you said, for the 1%? I guess I want to ask both, is it possible to change the forces at work there? And can you tell us concretely what it means to change the terms?
To break the theater?
Yeah.
So I think it is about, so I once called myself an activist, right? I call myself an organizer now, but I think that there is a room for activism. That is what I cut my teeth on. I rebelled, right? And rebellion is healthy, And I also found out, though, within that rebellion, particularly living in the Pacific Northwest, that there was an ability to become subcultural, right? So we created our own subculture where we no longer had to deal with the contradictions of what it meant, right, to actually be part of society and crafting a society and being in spaces where people don't agree with you, right? And in many ways, I would say Rukaiyah's role is much more courageous than my own, right? So if I'm sitting in a board meeting and someone says something that's racist or sexist or homophobic, I have all the space around me to say whatever I want to say. And sometimes I will say whatever I want to say. There is not the same cost and risk for me saying that, right? Someone who actually has to be within the contradictions, right, of a society actually has some risk, not just personal risk, right, but also the impact of what that means for the work that's being done or could be done, how that wealth could be utilized. Wealth is not going to go away because Rukaiyah decides to be an activist or not be an activist, right? And so we have to put ourselves in those spaces, but it comes with real risk. So to break the play, we have to stop doing what is expected of us.
Go tell it.
Right?
But
stop doing what's expected of us.
The thing that's expected of us is not to coordinate.
That's right.
So in order to have change, you have to have the spark, the heat, and the light, right?
That's right.
So I think in those situations, the example that you have, my role is not to be the spark. My role is to be the heat, to bring the heat so that we get to the light, right? And that I've accepted that role, right?
That's right.
And so where we fall down is when we're not a team.
That's right.
Right?
And we get pitted against one another, right? So the big example of this, right, is about, I don't know, say 12 years ago, I was at a rally. And it was an anti-Klan rally, right? So I'll make this one very clear, right? And it's an anti-Klan rally. I'm not that excited about the Klan. And people are chanting, you know, and there's law enforcement there, you know, who are on the line between the Klan and anti-Klan protesters like me. And folks are chanting blue by day, white by night, right? Meaning that folks are, you know, cops are wearing blue uniforms and, you know, but they're putting on Klan robes at night, right? Well, I'm like looking at this line while people are chanting blue by day, white by night, and I'm like, half these cops are black, right? And you were sitting there chanting to these police officers, these black folks, right, that they are members of the Klan, right? That is playing out political theater. Breaking the rules is figuring out a way to reconfigure that relationship, right? And to reinforce, right? Reinforce new rules that shift the narratives, right? One more example.
Yeah.
One more example. So lots of my left friends, right, they call themselves anti-capitalist, right? I think it's pretty funny because they're against capitalism, but it's hard to get them to actually fight any capitalists, right? But that's all right, another story. And one of the things that in your subculture is you don't have to deal with nuance, right? And so in nuance, what happens is you forget we live in a capitalist society, right? That is the nature of the economy here. And by that very nature, it means you are engaging with that system and that society. And it means that beyond our beliefs, there are actually people within that system, right, who are trying to shift the rules, right? And what happens is when we play our own rules, folks like us don't get to sit together. We don't get to have hard conversations, and we don't get a chance to figure out how to move things together. When we figure that out, that's how we begin to break the rules.
All right. Rukaiyah, I don't want to lose the metaphor of heat. I want to ask, in a way, what you meant by that, and I want to re-ask the question of how you change from within the terms.
Right, so it depends on the situation. So if I'm the chairman, I'd chop that shit immediately, right? Stops.
What is it that stops?
If I'm in control of the agenda and the discussion and the capital, then I have the authority to set the terms of engagement. And in that situation, you wouldn't need to do that. It would be taken care of, right? But I think in situations where I'm an upstart or people don't understand my power, then the knife fight happens in more discreet ways. So if we were in a board situation and someone said something racist, I might insult them with humor. I might, if I could influence the flow of capital, I might make that clear and change the flow of capital. If I can talk to their spouses and partners during a cocktail hour so that there's pillow talk about it, I might do that. But it depends. If I have the authority to take it head on, I will. But in any event, there will be a wrestling match, and it just might not play out in the public theater, that it will happen behind closed doors. And I will say that some of those conversations, they're not transactional, so it might not be a situation where somebody says something, and then in the moment or an hour later, I say something back. Some of those situations, it's been 20 years, and I've been hunting, right? Someone for some shit they said to me a long time ago or did, or that they continue to do, and it takes time. Some of these situations take time, and so it's not a transactional conversation. It takes patience and persistence, right? In the same way that it takes a long time to tamp out people and to oppress them, so too does gathering power and using it, right? That it takes stamina.
So stamina, hunting, wrestling, knife fight.
Sugar and spice, everything nice.
Spice. Well, I mean, Eric said
like a Marvel comic book, right? But no, right? Yeah, I love it.
But Eric, you said the importance of changing the narrative before, and so as we're talking about the future that you're envisioning and trying to move towards, and that's where I hope we can get more concrete. I hope as we go is the future we're aiming for. Should we be thinking about it in those terms?
I don't. I'll be interested in hearing. I've been really thinking deeply about what our generation's role is in civil rights and social transformation. And I was reading a book by Octavia Butler called The Parable of the Sower, and a book by Ursula Le Guin called The Left Hand of Darkness. I don't know if there are any sci-fi readers in town.
Now we're all getting excited,
all right.
Yeah.
So I'm a reader, and I spent a year reading sci-fi and reading the interviews of Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler. And one of the things that Ursula said was that that science fiction's role, the science fiction writer's role, is to envision the future, to help us imagine a new way of being. And I was reading that book about 3 years ago as we started the albino work. And that got me to thinking that my role in investing is to really see the future, right? Most of our investments are 20, 30 years out. We're moving capital many years before the reality sets in. And so I think stepping into my power as an investor in the civil rights movement, then I thought, well, maybe my role can be to help us envision a way that we can live together in the future, that I will try to take science fiction and imagine a way of living together. So you're a science fiction reader as well, and you are.
I don't know if I want to reveal my nerdness this early in the conversation.
Yo, I just said I spend my evenings reading.
I do.
Yes. And science fiction is social justice, right? It's helping us envision
It is
a
social
future.
justice,
Right.
or it can be anti-social justice, but it is visionary and it is narrative, and science fiction frees us, right? It unlocks the mind and it allows us to vision a world. And I tell, I've worked with a lot of younger organizers, and one of the things that I always tell them is for every nonfiction book, right, you should read, 9 fiction, right? And I actually believe that. All you all who are doing these study groups and just reading, it's nothing against nonfiction authors. It's just, we need visionaries. And the reason why is if we can't envision a future and conceptualize that future for other people, people aren't going to go with you. I promise you this right now. If you can't show people the future, people will stay in the present, no matter how bad it is. And we have been terrible at conceptualizing a future. We have been terrible at understanding the importance right, of opening space through mobilization, right, short-term mobilization, but holding on to a long-term vision, right? None of this happens, I would say, outside of Native American communities in the US. It has been a real struggle to think generationally, right? To understand what does it mean? And that's what I want to ask you, like, what does it mean to be working in the present for a future that you likely won't see?
Won't see, right? But many people have planted trees and gardens that they never imagined that they would enjoy the shade of, right? So African Americans planted cherry blossoms in North and Northeast Portland 50 years ago that they never saw the blooms.
That's right.
Yet here we are today thinking about these issues. So the visioning is where I started to spin my wheels and thinking that my role here will be to help us think about in 50 years, as we're all Portlanders, and we will be here in 50 years. My great-grandmother was here 50 years ago. We're going to be here. So if we're here, what will life be like? What will matter most to us? How can we take better care of each other? How do we express love? And it's funny that I felt most in danger as I started to express a point of view about as I started to talk in science fiction terms about where we might go. And in addition to looking out into the future, you can't just envision a future that's attainable by the work of few. It has to be a big enough, hard enough vision that it takes collective work to be compelling to drive cohesion in the present, right? It can't be little. It has to be big, right? A moonshot, except in this case, deep into our hearts about how we take care of each other instead of out into the great unknown. So I was sort of musing on how can I take the experience I have in my day-to-day work and push us all to the point where we're uncomfortable in thinking about our lives 25, 30 years from now when we're old people being pushed around, having our diapers changed, right? That what might life be like? How could it be different for a homegirl from around the way living in the Albina neighborhood? What would loving black men look like in an urban context, right? How might we light our streets differently? How might schools be organized if the point is to show love to black and brown boys? And that conversation is where I feel like I'm in the most danger. People are happy for me to talk about making money, but when I talk about making the future, then I've overstepped my bounds.
So lots in there, including, I think, the idea, again, of sort of competing stories. And the hard thing about envisioning a future that doesn't yet exist and matching that up against a kind of easy nostalgia or a simple story that people already seem to latch onto. And right now there's no shortage of simple stories that people seem to be latching onto with even renewed force. So I guess I want to ask about that. How is it that we could envision that future that isn't yet here and have it compete or surpass what might be anxiety-driven attachment to recognizable presents and pasts?
So there are a number of things. I mean, one is that we have to recognize the anxiety, right? So I wish there was a rule book, right? And in the rule book, the first thing that it would say, right, is that race doesn't exist, racism does, right? And the biggest trick, right, the biggest trick white supremacy ever played, right, was getting us to believe, right, that race was a real biological construction in this society. It has stolen the soul, right, of white folks, black folks, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, right? And it was created, right? So let's be clear, right? White supremacy was created, right, to establish and control, right, resources in this society, right? And it did so through controlling the reproduction of women, right? By genocide against indigenous folks, the stolen labor, right, and captivity of African people, right, and lying, right, to working poor and working class white folks by telling them that the privilege that they were given was power, right? And what it did was deny our humanity of who we are and the multitude of identities that all of us hold, right? And moving forward means re-envisioning. It's something that's actually very difficult. But how we do it is we do it through practice, right? So let's be honest. Anxiety exists. When I bring up the word racism, people have anxiety. I use public transportation, so I just like to say that, right? I love it. And it's frightening, right? But it's frightening for a number of reasons. One is Portland is 90% white. I don't know if folks know that, right? We don't like to talk about it. And so when I get on public transportation, right, going to and fro, it's likely, on average, 90% of the folks on public transportation are going to be white. White folks will not look me in the eye. And it is not because of hostility, but it is a false sense of shame, right? Racism has created a false sense of shame that denies white folks, right, from interacting with their humanness with another human being, right? White folks should be angry that so much has been denied. And the way that we move forward is we break down, we stumble through those walls. None of us, so the rest of this rule book says, I don't know. I actually don't know the answer. If I did, trust me, I'd be on Oprah, right?
You'd be Oprah.
Or I'd be Oprah.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I wouldn't Oprah. But I just say this because we keep asking ourselves, what is the answer? And we are not in a place of answers. We are in a place where experimentation and innovation is the most revolutionary act. It is a denial against this worship of death, right, that seeks to exclude us from one another. And so I tell people, stumble, fall, ask questions, ask embarrassing questions. If I don't want your question, you'll know if I don't want your question. Don't take it personally. It just means I didn't want to answer your question.
Yeah. Okay.
We have to experiment.
No, and I think maybe you've just defined why I feel like I'm in danger. I am experimenting with my humanity.
That's right.
Right, and I also have the advantage of being a middle-aged lady, a childless middle-aged lady, well-educated. I have time to think and reflect. A lot of women my age are busy with their families and their marriages, and I have enough education and experience now to look out and notice stuff. And what I've noticed is that in my role, I need to lily pad from having income parity to having privilege to having power. And the big leap that's in front of us today, and not just me, all of us, I'm a proxy for you. Your inner self is a middle-aged black woman, right? That where the leap we have to make is from accepting and understanding our privilege and not looking each other in the eye and accepting humanity and going from that to power. And in envisioning a future, I'm going from having the privilege of being the proxy for the 1% in this role, and Meyer, and for the pensioners in the state, to having the power to say, the way forward is this. And I think that humanity part of it is what I'm wrestling with, but the reason why I have the time to explore this part of humanity is that I have some wealth by proxy, that I have the education, I have the time, I have all these other privileges that give me the opportunity to do it. And here's the real thing. If what my life will be about is work. It damn well better matter, right? It's not, I'm not going to squander this.
Why squander it?
Right, I'm not going to squander it. So even though I'm afraid and we're in this really dangerous moment, there's really no other place to be. Like, what am I going to do? Like, join a country club and get my hair, done? Like, what else is there?
But wanting your work to matter, not wanting to squander it, wanting to change the narrative, and in general, I feel like I'm very committed, dispositionally committed to questions, to what's not known. But it makes me nervous right now.
Adam,
yeah.
The thing is, we have to gear the machine from discussion to action.
Okay.
Right.
What does that look like?
Got to move, because
What?
the talk, we have each other in this wrestling move where we're entangled with each other in the present about the past. But unless we take that energy and propel ourselves forward, in 20 years we'll be still locked in that dispute. So I guess one of the reasons why I'm trying to get us to envision a new Portland is to gear the machine and all the energy and all the power to start, to move in one direction or another. And there are current issues. We got issues with police brutality. We got issues with wealth disparities. We got issues with racism. We got issues with sexual harassment. We got a whole bunch of serious stuff in the present. But what I feel like we need more of is the tipping of energy toward some other way of being that will help us solve those problems. Does that make sense to you?
It makes sense. It makes
Let's
sense
go.
to me. I mean, you have to, look, I'm just going to tell Portland, and I'm going to tell Oregon, and I'm going to tell the
People
rest
love
of the
talking.
country, right? There is a movement growing in this country, and it's not our movement, right? There is a movement growing in this country. And that movement is not playing, and it calls itself white nationalism. And if you think it's white supremacy, you have another thing coming, right? White supremacy looks like a picnic to what is being proposed in this country, right? And what you have to understand is they have a vision for what this country should look like, and we have no response. And we are asking people to choose between folks who have a vision and those of us who have none, right? How do you think people are going to decide? And morally, we have turned our back, right? We have turned our back. We have made privilege the idea that somehow there is something fundamentally, corruptively wrong with white folks, right, in this country. And we have now allowed a whole nother movement to contest that white population, right, with no competition. No one's competing, right? What are we thinking? What are we thinking as strategists? What are we thinking as organizers? What I would say is that movement is about taking yourself seriously. Movement is about stepping out of subculture, right? We have a right, all of us have a right to live, love, and work. We should be unapologetic about that, right? That is not a demand. We should not have to demand that, right? And visioning is describing what that looks like. And if it looks like what it looks like right now, if all you can envision is what you see right now, you are not visioning, right? And what we need to know, I'll just say this. We need to stop talking about social justice, right? And start talking about large-scale, mass-based movements that realize not all of us, right, are rote in language, right, but that all of us are trying to move to a better place. So one example, right, you have a mayor here, I'm not going to get all partisan stuff, I'm C3, but you have a mayor here in Portland, right? And he has more black staff. I was wandering over there, wandering around, because I like to look around at things. He's got more black staff than most mayors I've seen in America, right? He's got more black staff in Portland, Oregon. What is going on in Portland, Oregon? that you all got more black staff than most mayors in America, right? Someone is visioning. Someone is visioning out there, right? I meet more white folks who want to talk about race than most white folks in America. And when other folks outside of Portland want to talk about race, they don't want to talk about it like folks in Portland, right? There is something here. And if we can't figure it out here in Portland, Oregon, the rest of this country is never going to figure it out. It is about breaking the rules.
Rukaiyah, is that your sense? So you came back to Portland for reasons. Does Portland, Oregon feel like a hopeful place of experimentation and breaking the rules the way that Eric just described?
It does, but I think it's going to take some bravery. It's going to take some failure. It's going to take a kind of civic engagement that we've had for episodic things, some sense like sort of environmentalism. I think we're going to have to apply that kind of fervor to how we take care of each other. But yeah, I'm here because I think this is where it's going to go down for a number of reasons. I know a lot about Portland's history. When my family moved here, a lot of African Americans between World War I and II rented attic apartments and rooms from German immigrants. We don't tell the story of those German people, right? The civil rights movement was in full bloom in the country. We were at each other's throats, but those people lived under the same roof and entered and exited through the same doors. And so there's a story about Portland and the people who live here that we've just broadly brushed as white that has a long history that is more complex than we let on. So yes, I think there is a future here. I also think a part of why things will happen here is the abundance of natural resources and the stewardship of natural resources in connection with how we take care of each other. I think the way we treat our environment and how we treat each other are closely tied. So yeah, I think that this is where it's going to go down. I also think it's going to go down here because some of us have decided as a cohort that this is the place to be, right? This is the place to be. So there are a number of reasons. We've talked a little bit about what it takes to be African American in Oregon and to be healthy. You can't be an African American here and look for external validation. Your blackness has to radiate from inside your heart. And that kind of centeredness creates a lot of opportunity if we can just get to cohesion and to coordination. I think that very interesting things will come out of this wild place.
That's right. So, I mean, we talked about this earlier. I mean, our families took similar paths that eventually brought us here, right? Mainly through California, right? And I left California when I was young. I was polite, but I was wild, right?
He's one of the wild ones.
Yeah, I'm still a little wild. And that wildness brought me up to Oregon, right? And then I got up here and I realized, wow, the black folks here are wild too, right? And Oregon was wild. But I have to say, right, we have the right to love Oregon too, right? And what we know is that we all have to move forward together, right? And I think it's really critical, right, that we both understand that history, right? There are black folks who've been here a long, long time. There are 5 generations, right, of black folks who have never left, right? That is courage, right? Native folks who have held on to their sovereign rights. That is courage. Asian folks who were perpetually driven out of this territory and stayed and survived. That is courage. White folks who drove out the Klan. That is courage, right? Latinos who have come up here, who are working these lands, being mistreated, is courage. There's a lot of courage here in Portland. I actually posit white nationalists haven't just targeted Portland and Oregon because it's vulnerable, but also because they see it as a threat, right? The vision, the idea that there can be a society free from bigotry, right, is a threat to the idea of white nationalism. And that's why we are here, right? We are here to prove that a better society can exist.
Let's do it.
So we're gonna open up to questions in just a minute. I want to just pick up on the word, Rukaiyah, you used the word cohesion. And I think, Eric, you were in many ways, you talked about courage, but you're also talking about a kind of shared vision. And I guess I want to ask about a couple, I mean, cohesion feels like the dream. Mm-hmm. Kind of social cohesion that in some ways we're not seeing. Go ahead.
I think we're still homesteaders, right? We're homesteading our souls now. Like we built the environment and the streets, but really we're in the early stages of understanding each other and building the kinds of structures we need to be safe and to take better care of each other and to have an economy that's inclusive. So it feels like we need to be reminded that our built environment is not a measure of our health, right, and of the challenge that's in front of us. So I think we just have lost track of the monumental task that's in front of us. We think that we're okay in our own families. We think that we're okay in our own neighborhoods. We think we're okay in our own schools. We're not. We're not doing okay. We have to band together, I think, in order to really get to the next level of American success and realization, the realization of what Americanness is. The other thing I would add to that is that you can't carve groups of people out of that. You just can't. Like, from an economic standpoint, cut the crap. Women are really important, right? So cut all the crap about how we're treated. Imagine if women didn't participate in the American workforce. It would be a national security issue.
That's right.
Not just an economic issue. Right, let's keep it real. If our Latino citizens and people who live in our communities didn't participate, that would be a major problem. If African American women went on strike, are you kidding me? So I just feel like let's cut the crap on all of this. We clearly need each other. And let's stop pretending like there are groups of us that are discardable or throwaways or waste. That's a bunch of nonsense. Honestly, the only superpower we have left in our economy is to make the parts, the people who are not contributing as much as they can, to get them engaged in it, because other countries in China, India, they got the rest of us matched. What's left is optimizing all of us. So I just feel like I want to just cut through all the nonsense about some people being unimportant or being deportable or being jailable. That's all a bunch of freaking nonsense.
There we go.
Thank you.
Right? Nonsense.
Yeah. Eric, were you going to speak to the question about cohesion for a minute, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about cohesion. So I think that it's so critical for us to begin to build power, right? And the way that we build power is by challenging institutions. The way we get to build power is through cohesion. But that cohesion doesn't happen until we begin to interact with one another, right? And when people come up to me and they say, yeah, Eric, I'm down, except for the gays, or folks who are trans, or Eric, I'm down, except for the immigrants, or the Latinos who moved in. I don't have time. We don't have time for that, right? Time is very limited, right? It's limited in the sense that there is another social movement on the field, right? And if we do not mobilize, right? If we do not build some cohesion, we will lose to that social movement, right? And we will be holding debates down in Guantanamo, if we're lucky. Cohesion means coming together, And cohesion means understanding when we first come together, we are going to be uncomfortable and we are going to have anxiety, right? And it will happen until we repeat that over and over again, right? If I walk into a room right now, right? If I walk into the room with 100 black women, first of all, I'm going to listen. But second, I'm going to feel uncomfortable and I'm going to feel anxiety. And when I come the second time, I'm going to feel it again. If I walk into a room with 100 business CEOs, I'm going to feel that same anxiety and comfortability until I do it over and over again. It is not that we don't know what to do. It is that we give up at the first sign of uncomfortability and anxiety, right? And I'll just say this, right? I have a vision, right? People in here have a vision. You know, I think about Martin Luther King in his last speech, right? People don't like to talk about Martin Luther King, but he was very smart and he was a good organizer. And you know what? His strategy was actually right? And we don't like to talk about that because, you know, he talked about nonviolence. We want to be tough, right? We want to play out another role that's been given to us. But Martin Luther King, in his last speech, got up there and he talked about this promised land, right? And it's prophetic because it almost sounds like he knew that his life was over, right? That his vision and dream had become such a threat. Now, I don't know what Martin Luther King saw, right? But he saw something. His vision of the promised land that we are all supposed to be heading to was powerful enough that he was willing to die for it, right? I don't know what that is, but I want to see it. And I want the rest of you to see it. And if you don't want everyone here, everyone in the streets of Portland and Oregon and around this world to see it, you actually aren't on our side. Everything else is commentary, right? It is about heading to that promised land. And the way that we get there is through practice, over and over again. Practice that builds power, not just presence. We can put lots of people of color in a boardroom. We can put lots of people of color in the theater, right? In a newspaper room. But if they don't have power, right? The ability to make decisions, we aren't really practicing. We're just playing.
So I want to ask the last question I'm going to ask by bringing it back to you as individuals, and then want to invite questions over here. We've been talking about envisioning a future, 20 years out, 30 years out, 50 years out, and we've been talking really about community. But I want to, if it's okay, ask you, when you look 20 years out, 30 years out, on an individual level, what do you see it looking like for you with respect to where you're trying to do your work and how you are trying to actualize the power that Eric was just talking about?
I'm visioning where I see Rukaiyah in 50 years. It's powerful.
I guess 30 years ago, I think about my grandparents. Gosh, 30 years ago, I was in high school. God, maybe I'm thinking 50 years ago. But many years ago, one of them had the courage to leave the violence of the Jim Crow South and literally flee that violence in search of political asylum, in the hope that one day one of their grandchildren or children would have access to clean air, meaningful work, and love, right? That was the most radical future that they could imagine. And I have that life. So when I look out 50 years from now, I hope that the people in Portland or in any city, and I hope that we're examples of this, can live in their bodies and have the fruit of their labor inure to their benefit, that they can be joyful and sorrowful and fully themselves everywhere. That education is just a state of being alive, that being educated is not controlled through privilege. I hope that that means that policing is a different verb. I hope that it means that we are in connection with the rivers and waterways that we are the stewards of protecting. I hope that a woman my age in 50 years doesn't feel like she's in danger for aspiring to that future. I hope that my great-grandmother can see that this life that she imagined is better than those three things that she wanted, that I'm unleashing an elevated level of humanity. I hope she can see that. That's what I hope for the future.
Yeah. Thank you.
Same question, huh?
I think so.
Wait, what was the question? Wait. Shit.
Don't worry about the question.
Right.
It's a good question. It's good. So, if I could wish one thing for the generation that exists 50 years from now, it's that they are not living in fear. I try to keep my hopes about the future very tangible. And I think fear has been used to divide us. It has been used to keep us from organizing power, right? I think it has been used, as I said before, to deny humanity. I think about when I was young, right? And I think about in the going back and forth to school in a period of integration and just being accosted by folks in cars and scream, go back to Africa, right? I'm not that old, right? But that was my generation. That's what it meant to go back to school. Worse things were said, right? It happens so much, right? So much every day that I never once thought about telling my parents. I never once thought about telling anyone in the school. It was just the normal part of my life, right? I hope for the generation 50 years from now that fear, right, is not normal, that it's the aberration, right? What I hope is that that generation looks back at this moment and says that this is the generations that existed in 2017 were the individuals who stood up together and said no more. And that no more means some very specific things. It means starting local, right? It means understanding that we have to act in real ways. And I just want to share one story. White nationalist during one of the midst of the free speech marches, right? White nationalist mobilization, for those who are confused. He was being interviewed by the media, and he said, the reporter said to him, you know, but Portland doesn't want you here, right? Portland citizens reject you, you know, the mayor has come out. And he said, yeah, I've heard that too. But the fact is, right, that the city of Portland has a shrinking black population in both numbers, right, whole numbers, and percentages. And then he said, it's the only urban city in America where that's happening, where the black population is shrinking in whole numbers, virtually disappearing. And then he said to the reporter, Portland is only doing what I could only dream about doing, right? I want this generation to be the generation that stops making excuses, that starts focusing on outcomes, right? That starts asking the question, yes, there always seems to be legitimate reason, but isn't it strange that every black public leader in Portland has been attacked by the statewide newspaper? Isn't it strange that black folks are disappearing in whole numbers? And this generation needs to accept that that's happening. We don't need to feel guilty about it, but we need to do something about it, right? The idea that Portland could lose its black population is a horror story in so many ways, right? How do we start? We start by coming together, addressing this. Let this be the generation that steps up. There are organizations, there are leaders. Have this conversation. So 50 years out, that generation is proud and not ashamed of who we are. That's what I hope.
So I would invite people that have questions to make their way towards this microphone over here, and as we start getting those set, maybe we can just say a preliminary large thanks to Eric and Rukaiyah for the heat and the light.
My mom is in the front row, Adam.
All right. Thank you.
We'd love to get in as many questions as we can in this, so just please have that in mind as you ask yours. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Walter Weaver, Vietnam veteran, and and all that good stuff. But anyway, Eric, you made the comment you just finished that black people are disappearing from Portland. And I've noticed it myself, and it seems like I'd like to know why they're choosing to move back down south. Can you answer that?
Can I answer why people are choosing to move back down south?
Yes.
So people are choosing to move down back south for a number of reasons. So one, my family left the South, fled the South, right? We were folks who were pushed out of the South through a lynching that happened in Shepherdsville, Kentucky in 1904. The lynching of Marie L. Thompson drove my family first to Arizona and then California, right? When I go back south, people say, you are not from here. And my response is, I'm more from here than you. My family has deeper, longer roots in the South, right, than most people who live there. So some folks are going back because it's home, right? Other folks are going back because they're being pushed out economically, right? And the South's infrastructure has been so decimated, right, that it is one of the few places, right, where you can be in poverty and actually live in poverty, right? So people aren't all moving back for the right reasons. Three, some folks have given up, right, on the idea that a multiracial democracy, right, can function in this society, right? And it behooves the rest of us who believe that a multiracial democracy can work, it behooves us to prove it. And we have not proven it. And so we are losing folks because they are being pushed out and because they are giving up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to first thank Eric and Rukaiyah for being here tonight.
Hey, Nicole.
Thank you so much. So my name is Nicole Rowe, and my question is, from an investment perspective, how do you combat the notion that human investment is not valued capital? When for capitalism, everything is based on goods and services, and racism is a good that is sold as a service that does not cost the producer anything to sell. So how do you sell the idea to invest in that?
We're both looking at Rukaiyah for that one.
I got thousands of opinions. I just don't know if they're right.
You know, you could have sent me that question ahead of time.
Sorry, Rukaiyah.
Yeah, that's right. You know I love you, boo. I will say that selling the idea of investing in each other and not just extracting from each other is the prevailing American challenge. The country was formed on exploiting and extracting. We killed people and took their lands, and then enslaved people and took the value of their labor. The challenge of our generations will be to reorient our capitalist structure away from exploiting humans to investing in humans. It never has been about that. Now, I don't think we'll get there until different kinds of people are in my seat, until the investors are saying, wait a minute, this isn't just about extraction, it's about investing in people. I mean, as I think about why a lot of African Americans have left Portland, we don't tell the story that the arrival in Portland, in addition to fleeing the violence of the Jim Crow South, was fundamentally a labor story. It was about investing in people. The shipbuilding industries and the wartime industries needed our labor more than it needed to be racist. And one of the reasons why we've been pushed out of our communities is because our new economy needs technical skills and people with coding skills more than they need people who are machinists, who we needed 50 years before. So the challenge for modern capitalism, in my mind, if you can see through the race issue, if you can see through some of the gender issues, is fundamentally a human issue, which is the point of this whole thing to extract wealth from each other or to build wealth together? That's the fundamental challenge that we're facing. And, you know, people like you, Nicole, I'm about to put you on the spot, homegirl. With your point of view about how we get around this place, why we're here, this conversation is how we make that pivot. It is no longer acceptable to have a capitalist system that's purely exploitative. It doesn't work anymore. As someone who would have been an object of that exploitation, who's now a subject in this system, I'm saying that ain't gonna work anymore. And that is the civil rights challenge of our generation, to go from being property to being owners and to redefine what ownership means, right? That's what we're up to. That's my thought.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Steve Wasserstrom. 30 years ago, when Mulugeta Seraw was kicked to death not very far from here, Eric and others organized against incipient white nationalism. We could not have imagined then where it's come now. The passion that you express, you know, I share with you about the rise of white nationalism. I'm still not sure that folks really get it, but I can hear it, and I also know from what you've written. And we need to be alarmed. What we were dealing with in bunkers and enclaves 30 years ago is running the Justice Department now.
That's right.
I don't remember, right? So what I'd ask you to say a little more maybe to Rukaiyah is, what can other folks who are not in the business of activism or academics like me, or where we sort of have a pathway to do certain, but for folks in other areas who have more power in what can they do to organize against the threat of white nationalism?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I wanna actually, it's hard for folks to accept, right? And so I like to start off by thinking about all the folks who aren't here tonight because they were afraid to come out of their homes, right? Because they might be targeted because they are Muslim, or who might be picked up by immigration enforcement, right? Because they appear to be undocumented, right? Are tired of being harassed by a criminal justice system that embraces racial profiling, right? It is hard to believe, but there are actually folks who are not in the audience tonight because of those very real reasons, right? And we often arrogantly assume, right, because it's not happening to us, that it's not happening, right? And I think, I've talked about this a little bit, so I would just say this. Let's talk about arrogance of liberalism, right, and the left for a second. And I just have to talk about how arrogant we are. We are so arrogant that we think we are the only folks who produce social movements of worth, right? We are so arrogant that we think our social movements, right, that our social movements are the only ones that make impact in this society. We are so arrogant that we think we are in a fight with the state, right, rather than in a contest around who controls the state, right? And if this state is going to be about an inclusive democracy that is people-centered, right, that is transparent and accountable, or if it is going to be a state that is a mechanism for ethnic cleansing and genocide in this country. We are so arrogant that we sit here and we tell folks that the white nationalism that is happening today is no different from the white supremacy of 50 years ago. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? 50 years ago, right? This is something different. These are not hate groups that are about spreading hate. They are seeking to control and seize the state, to enact a new vision. And what I wrote a couple of weeks ago is that white supremacy has a new competitor, and it's white nationalism. And if you don't get that, right, you are not preparing for the fights that are coming. If you think what's happening right now is the peak, you are missing the point, right? There is significant demographic anxiety in this country. There is significant economic disparity, right? And these are triggering new social movements, right, that want to who want to reshape our society in not ways that are beneficial for anyone in this room. Very few. So what I say is that we all have a stake, right? There is white supremacy. Let's be clear, de facto white supremacy still exists in this society, and we need to confront it, right? It is the contradiction to the idea of a multiracial democracy, and it has to be undermined and defeated. At the same time, we also have to contend with white nationalism that is a real social movement. And if you don't understand, those of us who are sitting in this room, that there are people in Portland who are afraid to come out of their homes right now, right? Then you are living in an illusionary world that is not reality. And so what do we do for those of us who aren't activists, right? We support, we be realistic, right, about real power. The way we beat white nationalism is not just going to be moralism. It's just not going to be because we resist hate. It's going to be because we organize enough power to resist their power. And that means holding the media accountable for not informing the public, right? It means ensuring that the rule of law does not collapse in this moment, right? And most important, it means figuring out real mechanisms that allow the greatest threat, right? The greatest threat to white nationalism to happen, which is finding spaces for us to take down the barriers around race, religion, gender, and sexual orientation that allow us to come together, right? And really project our power in this society. If you don't think we have power, and I'm just gonna end with this, if you don't think we have real power, look in this room. I promise you, if we didn't have power, we wouldn't be holding a public event at the Rose Theater, right? White nationalists may be flexing their power, but we have way more power than we think we have. And it is time for us to grow up and use that power for an inclusive democracy.
Preach. Preach. I like that.
My name is Dana Ghazi, and I want to thank Rukaiyah first for mentioning the story of your grandmother as an immigrant from Syria. Your story was an affirmation to the vision that refugees and immigrants have, and they have a right to that vision to see it happen. So with them being scapegoated, I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to ask a question around, you've talked a lot about power and about multiracial democracy, et cetera. And I want to, ask this question. You were mentioning that having power is not sitting around the table, but being the person who's always also making decisions. What about Obama? I mean, I want to understand, I grapple with this issue of institutionalized power, and we had, a person of color president, a black president, and then how is that different, limited, disadvantage, advantages of people power? Where is the tension, and what should we do about that? Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, I wish I had another glass of wine right now.
That's a hard question. I think it'll take us decades to understand the impact that President Obama had on our society. I mean, we're just beginning to comprehend his impact because of the foolishness that has come after him, right? That we couldn't see it in the positive, but we see it in the negative, right? But I also would add that one of the reasons why I think Portland has promise is that our government is a representative of the people. That you can have someone at the top, but you can't just put someone at the top and then expect the machine to change. You really have to build a political apparatus, an influence apparatus that has people at all levels in those organizations that drive an agenda, where there's collective action. So the lesson I would take away from it, as someone who had Obama through sort of my adult life, is that the next wave in the effort that we go for will be not only to have someone in the top spot, but to have someone as a secretary, and then have someone as deputy secretary, and as someone coming out of college who wants to be an intern, and then having people at the local level, that it really has to be infused with a strategic and planned wave of influence, right, and coordination. It can't be about individual people. It can't be about saviors. It really has to be about the people. So that's what's so exciting about Portland, is I think Portlanders engage at a civic level in a different way than people in other cities do. Leaders are accessible. We show up to meet our elected officials. We run for political office. So I would really say for this next generation, take it all over, right? And that the top level position is like the last thing to be worried about, because it's the line people who really control, real progress. So, that's how I feel. And I say that as someone who came up the ranks. I started as an analyst, or I started as a young lawyer who sat in the basement of, many buildings and read contracts for years and years and years before I got to the point where I could express a point of view. So my view is our government represents the people, and the power has to start with the people, and the figurehead, the person at the top, is the last manifestation of the power. It's not the beginning of the power.
So why don't we do this? It looks like we have two more questions, hopefully two fairly brief questions, and then we want to get to the trailer for the film that Ifani's working on, and then want to ask you a couple questions to discuss with each other as more wine has come to the table. Thank you. That's very nice. Thank you.
No, I'm okay. If I have any more wine, I'm sure I'll say something I shouldn't be saying.
I like this place.
Thank you.
My name is Tamis Rib, and I was wondering, so in some political discourse, some people have a tendency to dispute facts, like conservatives with climate change, and I'm sure there's better examples in the civil rights movement too. And others seem to entertain their lie. I'm interested, when somebody disputes a fact in one of your political conversations, how do you react, and how should we react in our own political conversations?
That's a great question.
So here's the interesting thing about facts, right? I have to tell you all this. Facts are a very peculiar thing, right? And we all have a lot of information that we put forward as facts, right? And some of us actually even have ideology. But the fact of the matter is that it is rare that someone does not have a pure contradictory ideology. So if you talk to me long enough, I will contradict myself, and I suspect if I talk to most people here long enough, I can get you to contradict yourself, right? Ideology is a strange thing. It's not really what moves most folks, right? Most folks are actually moved. We are emotional creatures, right? And emotion is what moves us. It's often why I say culture eats political strategy for breakfast, right? That is why, right, it is important to understand that most people, right, the majority of folks, right, in Oregon, in the country, in the world, do not care about conversations around liberalism, conservatism, or whatever political ideology. What they care about, right, is do they have a roof over their heads, right? Do they have food on the table, right? And is there the possibility of a better life for their children? That's what most folks care about. Now, there are the few nerds, like myself, right? And I'm not alone, because I hang out with the rest of you. And what we have to understand is that at the end of the day, it is our values that align us, not our ideology. And our values can be a little bit messy. But those values, if we spend time, right? So most of the folks I hang out with aren't very political, right? They're not political nerds like me. And I have lots of conversations with my friends who do not agree with me on a host of things. And sometimes they hem me up, right, on things. But at the end of the day, we do have some values. And some of the values that align us, right, is the belief that no one has the right to tell us who we can love, right, and cherish in our lives, right? And that no one has the right to bully another person because of their race, religion, gender, and sexual orientation, right? No one has the right to make another person die of starvation, right? There are values that align us, and we need to go back and have unapologetic conversations about those values. It is so, so critical. If we do not align around values, I promise whatever strategy you put up will get eaten alive by culture.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, and first, thank you for being here tonight and sharing your thoughts. My question is really around the comment that you made earlier, Eric, in regard to the lack of a competing vision against the white nationalist movement. We had an election about a year and a half ago at this point, where really it was supposed to be two competing visions for America, in a sense. Yet it seemed like the agenda of the kind of progressive, populist, grassroots movement was largely ignored, set aside, and not part of the larger platform. Can you talk a little bit about what we need to do to assert ourselves in our conversation and our ideas on this kind of larger national platform in order to have that competing vision?
Thanks.
Thank you.
I better sit and talk to this sister here, right? Look, I think it's a very real question, right? I think our vision is sidelined because we are subcultured, right? I think we have isolated ourselves so much, right? That we have the authorization, right, to be able to build broad-based mass movements, right, is no longer with us, right? So there used to be a time where we would agree, right, that there were real problems, and we would build broad-based coalitions, right, to address those problems. And at the same time, we would have discussions about underlying values that move us together. If we're serious about building, you know, the way you build broad-based coalitions is by talking to a broad base, right? If you want a subculture movement, keep talking to the folks that always agree with you. If you want a subculture movement, keep hanging out, right, with folks who are afraid to actually confront you and talk to you, right? The onus, we can, look, this is a country that has never liked the left, right? Let's be clear, right? It's been a country that's hostile in many ways, right, to radical democracy, right? But we do ourselves no favor, right, by becoming essentially like monks in a monastery, right, when we talk about radical democracy. If we are serious about building broad-based movements, start knocking on people's doors. Start standing outside of supermarkets. Start going to bowling alleys rather than reading groups, right? If you really think a broad-based movement is important, start talking to folks who aren't in your inner circle.
Thank you. Rukaiyah, I want to give you a chance to respond to the question about competing vision, and then we'll go to Ifanyi's trailer, which is also about a competing vision, but a thought on this competing vision.
I think visionaries are starting to speak up. That I'm observing that black girl magic is the antidote to just suckaism, right? I don't know what else to say. And I do feel like our voices are now bubbling to the top in a way that they hadn't in the past. So there are competing visions where I think I have to double down and really accept that there may be personal consequences that are worth the societal impact, and that I have to get whacked, right, or be vulnerable, or be willing to say, my heart is in this and I know the way. But I get the sense that our society, that this broad-based movement needs me to sprinkle my shit all over it, right? And just be black and beautiful and full of vision and hope, and to get us to pivot to the future not based on fear or anger or resentment or retaliation, but out of ambition and humanity and kindness and love. And run for office. See, Adam, I know that's you over there.